What's up, everybody? You may have heard of this. This is Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, published 1486 in the Holy Roman Empire, modern-day Germany. 6 years before Cristoforo Colombo set sail on the ocean blue. Written and published for the Venerable Pope Innocent VIII. Be wary of anyone who names themselves innocent. Actually, as far as papas go, he wasn't too bad, but it was written to refute claims that witchcraft was not real, to discredit skeptics, and to educate magistrates on how to find and convict witches. What? You mean some people didn't believe the Holy Fathers and their Inquisition? Start stacking the firewood, boys. I kind of had a hard time deciding which chapter to jump into. Like, concerning witches who copulate with devils, why is it that women are chiefly addicted to evil superstitions? Or of the way whereby a formal pact with evil is made, which is a pretty good one, just think AD Chrome. But we're going to go with how they are transported from place to place. It's really interesting to see how they thought back at this time, and you got to wonder if some of these witches actually had powers. I'm going to be referring to children as niños in this, but it seems like there are some old bloodlines today that still use niños as an admission fee to obtain an audience with supernatural powers. I don't think you're going to get Asmodeus off his couch in the bowels of hell by burning a piece of broccoli. So here we go. This is what the catholics were up to around the time of Columbus. How they are transported from place to place. And now we must consider their ceremonies and in what manner they proceed in their operations. First, in respect of their actions towards themselves and in their own persons. And among their chief operations are being bodily transported from place to place and to practice carnal connexion with incubus devils, which we shall treat of separately, beginning with their bodily vectation. But here it must be noted that this transvection offers a difficulty, which has often been mentioned, arising from one single authority where it is said, it cannot be admitted as true that certain wicked women, perverted by Satan and seduced by the illusions of phantasms and devils, do actually, as they believe and profess, ride in the nighttime on certain beasts with Diana, a goddess of the pagans, or with Herodias and an innumerable multitude of women, and in untimely silence of night pass over immense tracts of land, and have to obey her in all things as their mistress. Wherefore, which is kind of like why, wherefore the priests of God ought to preach to the people that this is altogether false, and that such phantasms are sent not by God, but an evil spirit to confuse the minds of the faithful. For Satan himself transforms himself into various shapes and forms, and by deluding in dreams the mind which he holds captive, leads it through devious ways. And there are those who, taking their example from Saint Germain and a certain other man who kept watch over his daughter to determine this matter, sometimes preach that this is an altogether impossible thing, and that it is indiscreet to ascribe to witches and their operations such levitations, as well as the injuries which happen to men, animals, and the fruits of the earth, since just as they are the victims of phantasy in their transvections, so also are they deluded in the matter of the harm they wreak on living creatures. But this question was refuted as heretical in the first question, for it leaves out of account the divine permission with regard to the devil's power, which extends to even greater things than this, and it is contrary to the meaning of sacred scripture and has caused intolerable damage to Holy Church, since now for many years, thanks to this pestiferous doctrine, witches have remained unpunished, because the secular courts have lost their power to punish them. Therefore, the diligent reader will consider what was set there down for the stamping out of that question, and will for the present note how they are transported, and in what ways this is possible, of which some examples will be adduced. So he says they're cursing the people, they're cursing the cows, making the apples go bad, and the secular authorities, the king's men, aren't doing anything about it. But we'll talk about all that later. You know they can fly, right? Yeah, right up through the air. It is shown in various ways that they can be bodily transported. And first, from the operations of other magicians. For if they could not be transported, it would either be because God does not permit it, or because the devil cannot do this since it is contrary to nature. It cannot be for the first reason, for both greater and less things can be done by the permission of God, and greater things are often done both to children and men, even to just men confirmed in grace. For when it is asked whether substitutions of children can be effected by the work of devils, and whether the devil can carry a man from place to place even against his will, to the first question the answer is yes. For William of Paris says in the last part of his De Universo, substitutions of children are, with God's permission, possible, so that the devil can effect a change of the child or even a transformation. For such children are always miserable and crying. and although, sorry, okay, see my changelings video, same thing. For such children are always miserable and crying, and although 4 or 5 mothers could hardly supply enough milk for them, they never grow fat, yet are heavy beyond the ordinary. But this should neither be affirmed nor denied to women on account of great fear which it may cause them. But they should be instructed to ask the opinion of learned men. Ah, yes, the Holy Fathers know. For God permits this on account of the sins of the parents, in that sometimes men curse their pregnant wives, saying, "May you be carrying a devil," or some such thing. In the same way, impatient women often say something of the sort. And many examples have been given by other men, some of them pious men. For Vincent of Beauvais related a story told by S. Peter Damian of a 5-year-old son of a nobleman who was for the time living in a monastery. And one night he was carried out of the monastery into a locked mill where he was found in the morning. And when he was questioned, he said that he had been carried by some men to a great feast and bidden to eat. And afterwards he was put into the mill through the roof. Now, look, that would be crazy for a kid to wind up locked in the mill in the morning. I don't think these people were stupid. They know whether or not it was possible for him to have climbed up and got in there. So either the kid thought this is a good way to stay out of trouble with these old superstitious monks, or the opposite of that. And he's like, man, I'm going to be in all kinds of trouble for saying this, but that's what happened. I would think the latter. And what of those magicians whom we generally call necromancers, who are often carried through the air by devils for long distances? And sometimes they even persuade others to go with them on a horse, which is not really a horse, but a devil in that form, and, as they say, thus warn their companions not to make the sign of the cross. And though we are 2 who write this book, one of us has very often seen and known such men. For there is a man who was once a scholar and is now believed to be a priest in the diocese of Friesburg, who used to say that at one time he had been bodily carried through the air by a devil and taken to the most remote parts. There lives another priest in Oberdorf, a town near Landshut, who was at that time a friend of one of us, who saw with his own eyes such a transportation, and tells how the man was borne on high with arms stretched out, shouting but not whimpering. And the cause, as he tells it, was as follows. A number of scholars had met together to drink beer, and they all agreed and they all agreed that the one who fetched the beer should not have to pay anything. And so one of them was going to fetch the beer, and on opening the door saw a thick cloud before the Grunzel, and returning in terror told his companions why he would not go for the drink. Then that one of them who was carried away said angrily, "Even if the devil were there, I shall fetch the drink." He's ready to tie one on. And going out, he was carried through the air in the sight of all the others. So it's probably good they said this happened before the beer. I laugh, but I don't know. You know, in a small town like this, if you make that kind of claim, then you're an outcast for the rest of your life, and you know it before you say that. But unfortunately, there's no account of what the guy said happened after he was carried off, which you'd think is a pretty pertinent detail, but that's it. And indeed, it must be confessed that such things can happen not only to those who are awake, but also to men who are asleep. Namely, they can be bodily transported through the air while they are fast asleep. This is clear in the case of certain men who walk in their sleep on the roofs of houses and over the highest buildings, and no one can oppose their progress either on high or below. And if they are called by their own names by the other bystanders, they immediately fall crashing to the ground. Many think, and not without reason, that this is the devil's work. For devils are of many different kinds, and some who fell from the lower choir of angels are tortured as if for smaller sins with lighter punishments, as well as the punishment of damnation, which they must suffer eternally. And these cannot hurt anybody, at least not seriously, but for the most part carry out only practical jokes. And others are incubi and succubi who punish men in the night, defiling them in the sin of lechery. It is not wonderful if they are given also to horseplay such as this. The truth can be deduced from the words of Cassian, where he says that there is no doubt that there are as many different unclean spirits as there are different desires in men. For it is manifest that some of them, which the common people call fawns, and we call trolls, which abound in Norway, are such buffoons and jokers that they haunt certain places and roads, and without being able to do any hurt to those who pass by, are content with mocking and deluding them, and try to weary them rather than to hurt them. Oh man, we got to go over the troll bridge. Those guys are jerks. And some of them visit men with harmless nightmares, but others are so furious and truculent that they are not content to afflict with an atrocious dilation the bodies of whom they inflate, but even come rushing from on high and hasten to strike them with the most savage blows. Our author means that they do not only possess men, but torture them horribly, as did those which are described in St. Matthew 8. From this we can conclude, first, that it must not be said that witches cannot be locally transported because God does not permit it. For if he permits it, in the case of the just and innocent, and of other magicians, how should he not in the case of those who are totally dedicated to the devil? And we say with all reverence, did not the devil take up our Savior and carry him up to a high place, as the Gospels testifies? You know, I never thought about that being actually flying up a mountain, but hey, that actually makes perfect sense. Neither can the second argument of our opponents be conceded, that the devil cannot do this thing, for it has already been shown that he has so great natural power, exceeding all corporeal power, that there is no earthly power that can be compared with him. As it is said, there is no power on earth that can be compared with him. Yeah, direct quote of myself 5 seconds ago. Indeed, the natural power or virtue which is in Lucifer is so great that there is none greater among the good angels in heaven. For just as he excelled all the angels in his nature, and not his nature, but only his grace, was diminished by his fall, so that nature still remains in him, although it is darkened and bound. Wherefore the gloss on that, there is no power on earth, says, although he excels all things, yet he is subject to the merits of the saints. Two objections which someone may bring forward are not valid. First, that man's soul could resist him, and that the text seems to speak of one devil in particular, since it speaks in the singular, namely Lucifer. And because it is he who tempted Christ in the wilderness and seduced the first man, he is now bound in chains. And the other angels are not so powerful, since he excels them all. Therefore, the other spirits cannot transport wicked men through the air from place to place. Nailed it! Did anybody else follow that? I think he's saying only the devil himself can transport somebody through the air. But wait, these arguments have no force, for to consider the angels first, even the least angel is incomparably superior to all human power, as can be proved in many ways. First, a spiritual is stronger than a corporeal power, and so it is the power of an angel, or even of the soul, greater than that of the body. Secondly, as to the soul, every bodily shape owes its individuality to matter, and in the case of human beings, to the fact that a soul informs it. but immaterial forms are absolute intelligences and therefore have an absolute and more universal power. For this reason, the soul, when joined to the body, cannot in this way suddenly transfer its body locally or raise it up in the air, although it could easily do so with God's permission if it were separate from the body. Much more, then, is this possible to an entirely immaterial spirit, such as good or bad angels. For a good spirit transported Habakkuk in a moment from Judea to Chaldea. Now, they've got the story of Habakkuk down here in the footnotes. In Daniel 14, now there was in Judea a prophet called Habakkuk, and he had boiled pottage and had broken bread in a bowl and was going into the field to carry it to the reapers. And the angel of the Lord said to Habakkuk, carry the dinner which thou hast into Babylon to Daniel, who is in the lion's den. And the angel of the Lord took him by the top of his head and carried him by the hair on his head and set him in Babylon over the den in the force of the Spirit. And Habakkuk cried, saying, O Daniel, thou servant of God, take the dinner that God hath sent thee. And Daniel said, Thou hast remembered me, O God, and thou hast not forsaken them that love thee. And Daniel arose and ate. And the angel of the Lord presently set Habakkuk again in his own place. So Habakkuk didn't know anything about where Babylon was. And the angel picked him up by the hair on his head. That's awesome. And for this reason, it is concluded that those who by night are carried in their sleep over high buildings are not carried by their own souls, nor by the influence of the stars, but by some mightier power, as was shown above. Thirdly, it is the nature of the body to be moved as to place directly by a spiritual nature. And as Aristotle says, local motion is the first of motions, being the most perfect of all bodily motions. And he proves this by saying that local motion is not intrinsically in the power of any body as such, but is due to some exterior force. I like how they say they proved something when they didn't really prove something. And what's this got to do with flying? I'm skipping ahead some. Now, the following is their method of being transported. They take the unguent, which is an ointment, which, as we have said, they make at the devil's instruction from the limbs of niños, particularly of those whom they have oft before baptism, and anoint with it a chair or a broomstick, whereupon they are immediately carried up into the air, either by day or by night, and either visible or, if they wish, invisibly. For the devil can conceal a body by the interposition of some other substance, as was shown in the first part of the treatise, where we spoke of the glamours and illusions caused by the devils. And although the devil, for the most part, performs this by means of this unguent, to the end that children should be deprived of the grace of baptism and of salvation, yet he often seems to effect the same transvection without its use. For at times he transports the witches on animals, which are not true animals but devils in that form. And sometimes, even without any exterior help, they are visibly carried solely by the operation of the devil's power. Here is an instance of a visible transvection in the daytime. In the town of Waldshut on the Rhine, in the diocese of Constance, there was a certain witch who was so detested by the townsfolk that she was not invited to the celebration of a wedding at which, however, nearly all the other townfolk were present. Being indignant because of this and wishing to be revenged, she summoned a devil and, telling him the cause of her vexation, asked him to raise a hailstorm and drive all the wedding guests from their dancing. And the devil agreed and raised her up, carried her through the air to a hill near the town. And in the sight of some shepherds, so we got witnesses to all this. And since she afterwards confessed she had no water to pour into the trench, for this, as we shall show, is the method they use to raise hailstorms. She made a small trench and filled it with her urine instead of water, and stirred it with her finger, after by their custom, with the devil standing by. Then the devil suddenly raised that liquid up and sent a violent storm of hailstones, which fell only on the dancers and townsfolk. And when they had dispersed and they were discussing among themselves the cause of that storm, the witch shortly afterwards entered the town, and this greatly aroused their suspicions. But when the shepherds had told what they had seen, their suspicions became almost a certainty. So she was arrested and confessed that she had done this thing because she had not been invited to the wedding. And for this, and for many other witchcrafts which she had perpetrated, she was burned. So the witch sent a peace storm because she wasn't invited to the wedding. That's great. I don't know if this one is so much a witch. I think just nobody could stand to be around her. And then they're all drunk and pissed off because the wedding got rained out. But the shepherds saw her being flown up there and urinating in a trench because everybody knows that's how you start a hailstorm. Well, usually with water. And since the public report of this, the rumor mill sort of transvection is continually being spread even among the common people, it is necessary to aid further proof of it here. But we hope that this will suffice to refute those who either deny altogether that there are such transvections or try to maintain that they are only imaginary or fantastical. And indeed, it would be a matter of small importance if such men were left in their error, were it not that this error trends to the damage of the faith. For notice that, not content with that error, they do not fear to maintain and publish others also, to the increase of witches and the detriment of the faith. For they assert that all the witchcraft which is truly and actually ascribed to the witches as an instrument of the devil is only so ascribed in imagination and illusion, as if they were really harmless, just as their transvection is only fantastic. And for this reason, many witches remain unpunished, to the great dispraise of the Creator and to their own most heavy increase. We're going to skip down to the bottom here. That's just a bunch of circle talk. For they are transported both bodily and fantastically, as is proved by their own confessions, not only of those that have been burned, but also of others who have returned to penitence and the faith. Among such, there was a woman in the town of Briage, whom we asked whether they could be transported only in imagination or actually in the body. And she answered that it was possible in both ways. For if they do not wish to be bodily transferred, but want to know all that is being done in a meeting of their companions, when they observe the following procedure. Then they observe the following procedure. In the name of all the devils, they lie down to sleep on their left side, and then a sort of bluish vapor comes from their mouth, through which they can clearly see what is happening. But if they wish to be bodily transported, they must observe the method which has been told. Besides, even if that canon be understood in its bare meaning without any explanation, who is so dense as to maintain that on account that all witchcraft and injuries are fantastic and imaginary, when the contrary is evident to the senses of everybody? That's just some good old-fashioned rhetoric right there. You know, we've all seen it with our own eyes. Oh, yay, with our own eyes. Especially since there are many species of superstition, namely 14, among which the species of witches holds the highest degree in spells and injuries, and the species of pythonesis, to which they can be reduced, which is only able to be transported in imagination, holds the lowest degree. So only the witches that have properly transvexed with the devil can fly bodily, and the lower witches can see what's going on away from where they're at. And we do not concede that their error can be substantiated by the legends of Saint Germain and certain others. I don't think he's talking about Count Saint Germain, the immortal here, in case you're wondering. If it was possible for the devils to lie down themselves by the side of the sleeping husbands during the time when a watch was being kept on the wives, just as if they were sleeping with their husbands. And we do not say that this was done for any reverence felt for the saint, but the case is put that the opposite of what is set down in the legend may not be believed to be impossible. So you better watch out. I heard Sancho was at your house last night. Only my Mexican viewers are going to get that. But I think everybody knows who Sancho is. In the same way, all other objections can be answered. That is found that some witches can be transported only in imagination, but that it is also found in the writings of the doctors that many have been bodily transported. Whoever wishes may refer to Thomas of Brabant in his book about bees, and he will find many wonderful things concerning both the imaginary and the bodily transvection of men. Well, there you have it, folks. Proof, air quotes, that a powerful witch can be transported from place to place, either bodily or in the spirit, while lesser witches are only able to do so phantasmagorically. This is, of course, after copulating with devils and making a baby paste to rub all over your broomstick. And the other thing I learned here is if an angel ever tells you to go somewhere and do something and you don't know where that place is, just tell him you got it and Google Maps that shit. Otherwise, he's going to pick you up by the hair on your head and carry you there. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. That was actually a really good translation, because usually with something that old and in another language, the grammar and syntax and everything is just off, but that read actually pretty fluid. May have to do more on this down the line. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.